rearranged their schedule to be here at this surprisingly early hour. The request for this debate was lodged several months ago when the government was reviewing its entire plan for HS2. In the meantime, of course, it has announced the intention to go ahead. Subsequently, we've had an announcement of plans by the broadcaster and campaigner Chris Packham to seek a judicial review of the decision in the light of the climate and wildlife impacts of the HS2 plan. That came after the High Court ruled that the government's decision to go ahead with the proposed Heathrow third runway had failed to take into account commitments it had made under the Paris Agreement on climate change. The government has said it will not appeal that decision. Legal commentators have also said that other challenges may well be launched to HS2. And this comes as North Somerset Council made the historic decision, after a great deal of work by campaigners, not to allow the expansion of Bristol Airport on the basis of the climate emergency. Now, I wouldn't presume in your Lordship's House, with our many distinguished legal experts, to offer a detailed legal commentary, but I don't think that you have to be an expert to see that the legal ground has shifted, as the physical climate and the state of the natural world has grossly deteriorated. We are in a climate emergency, and plans made a decade ago on highly dubious grounds then are clearly outdated and quite possibly illegal. To rely, in this age of clear and understood climate emergency, an emergency acknowledged by the Government and Parliament, on a Phase 1 environmental statement completed in 2013 is farcical. That was before the Paris Agreement was even concluded, the agreement to which this government has signed up and taken on the great responsibility of delivering at COP26. That a court has ruled out the Heathrow third runway on the grounds of the insufficient environmental consideration, but then the government should be ploughing ahead with HS2, celebrated by the administration of Birmingham Airport as a great boost to its business, cannot be squared up. As Extinction Rebellion has said, HS2 is an aviation shuttle service. And the climate emergency is not the only pressing critical issue. We are also in a nature crisis. The UK is one of the most nature-deprived countries in the world, a fact that has led civil society groups representing some 10 million Britons, from the National Trust to Buglife, the RSPB to the Woodland Trust, to demand that the current HS2 plans not go ahead. Now, my understanding is that in the legal case, the government is claiming that the decision they made on the 11th of February to go ahead with HS2 is merely a political one. But, my lords, the atmosphere does not respond to political arguments, does not reduce its temperature as the result of rhetoric. The ancient trees and birds, the wetland plants and the mammals on the HS2 route are not going to see their lives saved, their environments protected by government words. It is the bulldozers and the chainsaws that loom over them, and the intended notice to proceed that we expect to see within weeks, unless the court comes to their rescue, as it did to the rescue of the climate with regard to Heathrow. There are two potential approaches to the way forward from here, and I would expect this debate to cover both of them. First, and definitely my and the Green Party's preferred option, is to stop the whole project. Stop throwing good money after bad. Yes, £8 billion has already been spent on HS2, but that is dwarfed by the potential £106 billion and counting cost of going ahead. That is money that's not only threatening to produce a white elephant, but it has an opportunity cost. Money that is not being spent on walking and cycling facilities, the local buses and the regional trains that would slash our carbon emissions, helping us to meet our legally binding agreements under COP, that would cause vastly less damage to biodiversity and bioabundance, and would also help local economies rather than further boosting the Great Wen of London. If the government wants to say that HS2 is part of the much vaunted levelling up for the North and the Midlands, with 40% of the economic benefit going to London, that doesn't add up. HS2 is pumping even more money, resources and people into the capital that is already suffering from the economic weakness of its hinterland. There's also an opportunity cost in skills, machinery and worker capacity. We know we have a massive skills shortage in the UK. The construction industry is gravely concerned about the impacts of Brexit on its labour supply, about the ageing of its workforce. Workers are a valuable, scarce resource who should be working to the best benefit for the people of the UK and its desperately damaged natural world. And there's also, of course, the climate impact to which I've already alluded. According to HS2's own forecasts, even over 120 years, its overall construction and operation caused carbon emissions of 1.4 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. And in the next crucial 10 years, before it even gets to Birmingham, the impact is heavy and damaging. That period when we need to slash our emissions, we're instead creating massive quantities. All that concrete, all that steel, all those bulldozers. So my number one ask, my question to the government today is, will you stop HS2? As 10 million members are asking. Members of NGOs are asking. Alternatively, and because this is a debate, a secondary way of proceeding is to improve, to reduce the damage caused by the initial and second stages. We might indeed perhaps reverse the order of them altogether. Sometimes, and I understand this entirely, campaigners feel like we need to be absolutist, to say we're only interested in stopping something dreadful. But I see nothing wrong with both trying to stop something, but also understanding that any political or legal effort might fail, and working at the same time to limit, reduce the damage. Indeed, many years ago, when I lived in Somerstown in Camden, I had talks with HS2 about reducing the dreadful impact on residents of social housing there. Although I claim no personal credit, I'm sure many others were making the same representations. Plans to double decant residents, to make them move twice, were changed. That is why I asked in this debate to consider potential changes to the route, to the speed and the station locations of HS2, something that I think further parts of the debate will hopefully pick up and amplify in more time than I have available. I would ask you to consider the positions, strong and clear, of the wildlife trusts. They are concerned about wildlife, so they don't have a particular position on HS2 as an overall project. Their concern has always been the current design's impact on wildlife. And responding to the government's February 11 announcement, they pleaded that it is more critical than ever that the whole project is redesigned before HS2 creates a scar that can never heal. That, Your Lordships, comes not from me but from the wildlife trusts. At the heart of this problem is speed. Speed that demands straightness. A straight line that in total affects 350 wildlife sites, nature reserves, ancient forests and woodlands, home to some of the UK's rarest species, but also home to huge numbers of starlings and sparrows, frogs and toads, animals that may not be rare, but that we've seen numbers collapse over recent decades. We need to preserve them all. We cannot afford this destruction. And then, of course, there's the human destruction. There are communities, too many communities, where life has already been blighted by the concept of HS2, the prospect of HS2. That blight threatens to become permanent and could be changed. HS2 started arguing that the speed was crucial. When that argument fell apart, based on the curious assumption that business people don't work on trains, they shifted to arguing about capacity. But capacity doesn't need super high speed, speeds far exceeding that of continental trains that travel far greater distances, speed that consumes massive amounts of energy. And less speed means more chance to avoid ploughing through ancient, irreparable woodlands and wetlands and communities. And the idea that this can be offset, biodiversity offsetting. An ancient woodland has taken hundreds of years to create. Sticking in a few saplings does not replace it. There's also the question of parkway stations, stations to which we all know it's highly likely passengers will drive. The Green Party decided at its conference in Cardiff in February 2011 to oppose HS2. And I sometimes feel like I've talked about little else since. But the arguments essentially haven't changed. Just the nature crisis and the climate emergency have become far more pressing. So I'll conclude with the words of transport and sustainability expert Professor John Whiteleg, who said then, "Everyone knows the Greens are passionately committed to social justice and the environment. The current HS2 proposals would serve neither." My Lords, I ask you to consider today that on many issues, I believe this debate has been extended. From the climate emergency to air pollution,